All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into something that's got everyone talking to us, the Adaptus 2 framework.
Yeah.
It claims to be like a no-code, config-driven approach to building APIs, which honestly sounds kind of too good to be true, right?
Yeah, it's definitely causing a lot of buzz. I think for good reason. Some people are saying it could be like a total paradigm shift in how we think about API development.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. This no-code thing, how does that even work? I thought the chef analogy in the source material was pretty interesting. Like if you think about traditional cooking, you're chopping veggies and measuring spices and constantly checking the recipe. It gets the job done. But it's a lot of work. That's kind of like using something like Express.js. It's a solid framework.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of manual coding involved.
Right, exactly. And so then imagine you walk into like a Michelin star kitchen and they have this super smart system that basically cooks for you. You just tell it what kind of dish you want, the flavors, dietary restrictions, and boom, it preps the ingredients, adjusts the cooking times, plates it beautifully. That's kind of the idea behind Adaptus 2. So instead of writing lines and lines of code, you're just defining your API in a configuration file. And then Adaptus 2 just takes care of the rest.
So instead of like spending hours writing code for controllers and services, I'm basically just configuring a file. And that's it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a total game changer, especially if you're like a startup or a solo developer. You need to get things done quickly. We could be talking about cutting development time from weeks to days, maybe even hours.
Wow. That's a massive time saver. I mean, that also makes these tools way more accessible to people who might not have years of coding experience right now.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of what makes this so exciting. This idea of like democratizing technology, it lowers the barrier to entry for building APIs. And that could lead to a whole wave of innovation from people who, might not have been able to build these applications before.
I love that. Okay, so let's get practical for a second. You mentioned Express.js. How does Adaptus 2 actually compare to other popular frameworks like that?
Okay, so think of Express.js like building a house from scratch. You have all the flexibility in the world, but you are responsible for every single brick and board. Adaptus 2 is more like a modular home system. You choose the components you need, the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room. They come pre-built and ready to assemble.
Interesting. So it's like less grunt work and more focus on the big picture.
Exactly. It frees you up to spend more time on like the design and functionality of your API, the stuff that really matters.
Okay, cool. What about something like Nest.js? I know that's really popular for its structured approach and its use of TypeScript.
Yeah, Nest.js is great. That structure is definitely valuable. But Adaptus 2 kind of takes it a step further. Remember all that time you spend coding controllers and services?
Yeah.
Adaptus 2 just eliminates that completely. It generates them for you based on your configuration file.
Wow. That's some serious time-saving magic.
It is. And then if you compare it to something like Loopback, which also focuses on like declarative API creation, Adaptus 2 takes it to a whole new level. Loopback still requires you to do a lot of customization, and there's still a learning curve. Adaptus 2 just packs in all these features like GraphQL support, machine learning integration, rule-based processing, things that would normally take a lot of extra effort.
Okay. You've definitely got my attention now. Let's break down some of these standout features. You keep mentioning this. No-code API setup. How does that actually work?
So it's pretty much as straightforward as it sounds. Instead of writing lines and lines of code, you describe your API's structure and behavior in a configuration file. This file outlines things like your data models, endpoints, authentication rules, even how your API interacts with other services. Think of it like a blueprint for your API.
So no more late nights, hunting down, missing semicolons, or wrestling with complex syntax.
Exactly. The framework just reads your configuration file, and it generates all necessary code in the background. It's almost like having a coding assistant that just understands what you want and builds it for you.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a huge win, both for seasoned developers and for people who are just starting out. Less time debugging means more time creating awesome applications.
Exactly. It makes API development more accessible and definitely less error prone.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of making things easier, I got to ask about databases. Connecting your API to a database can be such a pain sometimes. How does Adaptus 2 handle that?
So it actually makes database integration incredibly smooth. Adaptus 2 can connect to all kinds of databases, from the familiar ones like MySQL and PostgreSQL to new SQL options like MongoDB and even cloud data warehouses like Snowflake.
So no matter what database I'm using, Adaptus 2 can handle it.
Yeah, you got it. And here's the really cool part. It automatically analyzes your database's structure And then it creates the corresponding beta models for your API. So you don't have to write any of that tedious database interaction code.
That's incredibly powerful. It takes away so much of the complexity, and it lets developers really focus on building the core logic of their application. But let's be honest, what really sets Adaptus 2 apart is this focus on AI and machine learning. It's not just about building APIs, it's about building intelligent APIs.
You hit the nail on the head. One of the most exciting features is that it seamlessly integrates machine learning capabilities. This means you can incorporate AI-powered features into your APIs without needing to be a machine learning expert yourself.
Hold on, so you're saying I can add AI features to my API without needing a PhD in data science?
That's the idea. So imagine you're building an e-commerce platform. With Adaptus 2, you could easily integrate things like sentiment analysis to gauge customer feedback from reviews, or you could implement recommendation algorithms to suggest products to users. And you can do all of this without writing a single line of machine learning code.
That's a game changer. It just opens up a whole new world of possibilities for developers who might not have that deep AI expertise.
It's about empowering developers to build smarter applications that can learn and adapt over time.
Okay, so we've talked about no-code setup, streamlined databases, AI integration. What other surprises does Adaptus 2 have in store?
Well, for starters, it really embraces the power of real-time data. It has built-in support for WebSockets, which enables this constant two-way communication between your API and its users. This opens up a ton of possibilities for applications that need instant updates, like chat apps, live dashboards, or collaborative tools.
So if I'm building an app that relies on real-time feedback, Adaptus 2 has got me covered.
Yes. Absolutely. And it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about API styles for a second. Nowadays, developers often have to choose between REST and GraphQL, which can be limiting.
Yeah, I've run into that before.
Right.
Having to pick one or the other can feel like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Right. But Adaptus 2 offers this flexible hybrid approach. You can maintain your existing REST APIs. While seamlessly integrating GraphQL, it can even automatically generate GraphQL schemas based on your configuration.
So it's the best of both worlds. That kind of flexibility is so important in the tech world where things are constantly changing. But what about business logic? You know, all those complex rules and processes that define how an application actually behaves. How does Adaptus 2 handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Business logic can get really hairy, especially as applications kind of grow and evolve over time. But Adaptus 2 actually has this really cool feature called the Business Rule Engine. And basically, imagine being able to define all these complex business rules using like simple human-readable language, almost like writing a set of instructions. And then these rules can be directly applied to your API's behavior, which allows it to adapt to all these changing business needs without you having to like go in and rewrite a bunch of code every time something changes.
So it's kind of like setting up these if-then-else statements that control how my API responds in different situations.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives you a way to make your API much smarter and more responsive without having to do all those complex code modifications.
That's really cool. It's like giving your API a brain of its own.
Yeah.
But with all this power and automation, gotta ask about security. Isn't there a risk that simplifying things like this could actually make the API more vulnerable?
That's a valid concern for sure. But Adaptus 2 actually takes security very seriously. It has all these built-in features like JWT authentication, access control lists, rate limiting. All these are industry standard security measures that help to protect your API from unauthorized access and attacks.
Okay, so it's not just about making things easier. It's about doing it securely, which is a huge relief, honestly. But there's one more feature I'm really curious about. You mentioned RI, or retrieval augmented generation for AI APIs. That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. What is that exactly?
I know it sounds futuristic. It's actually a pretty practical way to enhance your AI-powered APIs. Imagine you have like an AI chatbot for customer support with RREG. That chatbot can tap into external sources of information like product documentation, FAQs, even past customer interactions to provide like more comprehensive and relevant answers.
So it's like giving your AI a superpowered memory and a research assistant.
Basically, It's all about making AI more powerful and more helpful in the real world.
That's incredible. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and Adaptus 2 sounds like a truly revolutionary framework with so much to offer. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about who this is actually for. Is it just for startups? Or can larger companies and even AI specialists benefit from using Adaptus 2?
So Adaptus 2 is designed to be really versatile and to benefit a wide range of users. So yeah, our startups can definitely leverage it to rapidly prototype and launch new applications without needing a huge development team. Enterprise teams can use it to really streamline their API development process and reduce time to market. And even data scientists and AI specialists can benefit from its easy-to-use machine learning integration capabilities.
So it really is a tool that can be used across the board,
Yeah.
from small startups to large enterprises.
Yeah.
And even those specialized AI teams. That's pretty impressive. Okay, but let's get down to brass tacks here. For our listeners who are like itching to try this out, what are the basic steps to get started with Adaptus 2?
Getting started is actually surprisingly simple. You can install Adaptus 2 using npm, which is the node.js package manager, and then you can use a command line interface to quickly scaffold a new project. From there, you just define your API in a configuration file, build the project, and start the server. It's all very intuitive and well documented.
It sounds almost too easy. Just a few commands, and you're off to the races building. Powerful APIs with AI baked right in. That's pretty remarkable.
It is. The goal is really to empower developers to focus on building great applications, not wrestling with complex setup procedure.
Adaptus 2 has definitely lived up to the hype. It's a game changer in every sense of the word. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. What do you think the long-term implications of this kind of technology might be? How could it influence the future of API development and even the roles of developers themselves?
That's a great question. As Adaptus 2 and other similar frameworks become more commonplace, I think we might see a pretty fundamental shift in the developer landscape. Developers might spend less time writing that low-level code and more time focusing on higher-level tasks, like designing elegant solution or orchestrating these complex systems and really understanding the nuances of business logic.
It's almost like
Yeah.
a conductor of an orchestra, bringing together all these different components and services to treat this harmonious whole.
Exactly. Developers could become more like architects or designers, focusing on the big picture, making sure that all the pieces fit together seamlessly.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also opens up all these new possibilities for developers who might not have like traditional coding backgrounds, but have a deep understanding of business logic, user experience, or other critical areas.
Absolutely. And I think that's ultimately what makes Adaptus 2 so exciting. It has the potential to break down barriers, democratize access to technology, and empower a much more diverse group of people to build incredible things.
It feels like we're at this turning point.
Yeah.
And it's both thrilling and a little bit daunting. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be fascinating to watch how this all unfolds in the coming years.
I totally agree. It's a good reminder that technology is constantly evolving. And the best thing we can do is embrace that change. Stay curious and never stop learning.
It's kind of funny. We started this whole deep dive talking about how Adaptus 2 could be like a total paradigm shift in API development. And the more we talk about it, the more I'm starting to believe it. It's not even just about the features themselves. It's about what those features enable. It's about empowering more people to create innovative solutions, regardless of their technical background.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like we're on the verge of a whole new era of software development, one that's more accessible, way more efficient, and ultimately more focused on solving real-world problems.
Yeah, that brings me to what I think is one of the most exciting aspects of all this, the potential impact on the developer landscape. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to kind of dive in a little deeper. If Adaptus 2 becomes as widely adopted as some people are predicting, how do you see it changing the roles and responsibilities of developers?
That's a really interesting question. You know, these no-code and low-code platforms become more and more sophisticated. We might start to see this shift in focus for developers. They might end up spending less time writing that nitty-gritty code and more time on things like systems, architecture, or data modeling, and really understanding the needs of users.
So it's almost like they become like the conductor of an orchestra, bringing together all these different components and services to create this like harmonious whole.
Exactly. Developers could become more like architects or designers, focusing on the big picture, making sure that all the pieces fit together seamlessly.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also opens up a ton of possibilities for developers who maybe don't have those traditional coding backgrounds, but they have this really deep understanding of business logic or user experience
Yeah.
or other critical areas.
Right. And I
Well,
think that's a huge part of what makes Adaptus 2
Yeah.
so exciting. It has the potential to break down these barriers, democratize access to technology, and empower a much more diverse group of people to build really incredible things.
It does feel like we're at a turning point. It's both thrilling and a little bit daunting at the same time. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be fascinating to watch how this all plays out
Yeah.
over the next few years.
Definitely. It's a good reminder that technology is always evolving, and the best thing we can do is embrace that change. Stay curious and never stop learning.
Well said. So to all of our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive into Adaptus 2 has given you at least a glimpse into the future of API development and sparked your imagination about what's possible. Whether you're a seasoned developer or just starting your journey, we encourage you to explore these new tools and frameworks, push your boundaries, and see what amazing things you can create.
Yeah. And remember, the future of technology is in your hands.
That's a great way to put it. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, keep exploring, keep innovating, and happy coding.
Happy coding.